My stepmom forced me to let my stepsister move in. I refused and she ran away. Now my family blames me for ruining her life, but then she sent me a message saying, I, 26M, have a younger brother, Luke, 23M, and we've been living together in a rented apartment for almost a year now. We both work full-time and decided it made sense to split rent and expenses instead of living separately. So far, it's been great. We get along, we're both pretty clean and respectful of each other's space, and we genuinely enjoy each other's company. Plus, it's given us a chance to bond more as adults. The situation with the rest of our family, however, is complicated. Our dad remarried about 8 years ago to our stepmom, Karen, 45F. She has a daughter, Emily, 19F, from a previous relationship. Emily was about 11 when our parents got together, and while she's technically our stepsister, we've never been that close. It's not like we dislike each other or anything, but there's always been this awkward distance between us. She mostly kept to herself growing up and never really showed much interest in being part of the family. After finishing high school last year, Emily moved out to live with a friend and work part-time. We didn't hear much from her except for the occasional holiday get-togethers. But recently things changed. Apparently, her roommate moved back in with her parents, and Emily couldn't afford to keep the apartment on her own, so she ended up moving back in with my dad and Karen. From what I've heard, she's struggling to find a job that pays more and is feeling pretty down about the whole situation. Now, here's where things get sticky. Last weekend, my dad called Luke and me, saying he and Karen wanted to talk. We figured it was about Thanksgiving plans or something, but when we got there, Karen and Emily were also sitting in the living room looking uncomfortable. Karen launched into this whole speech about how Emily needs a fresh start and that being around people her age with similar schedules would really help her get back on track. And then she dropped the bomb. She asked if Emily could move in with us for a few months, just until she gets on her feet again. I was floored. They'd never hinted at this before, and suddenly it felt like they were ganging up on us. I immediately started thinking about all the logistics. Our apartment is a 2-bedroom, and while we have a small living room, it's not exactly spacious enough for a third person. Not to mention, Emily is still trying to figure things out, and I'm worried she might not be able to contribute to rent or expenses. Luke stayed quiet, so I asked if she had a job lined up or a plan for moving forward. Karen got defensive, saying that it's been hard for Emily and she just needs a little support. I didn't want to seem like the bad guy, but I told them that it didn't feel like a good idea. Our current setup is working really well, and adding a third person, especially someone we're not super close with, could really mess up the dynamic. Karen's face fell, and I could tell she was trying to keep calm. She said that as family, it's our responsibility to help each other out, and that Emily isn't some stranger. She'd even be willing to pay a portion of Emily's share of the rent if money was the issue. But it's not just about the money. It's the fact that Emily's never really been part of our lives, and suddenly having her live with us feels like a huge imposition. I looked over at Luke, hoping he'd chime in, but he just shrugged and said he'd go with whatever I decided. Thanks, bro. Karen turned to Emily, who looked like she was about to cry, and then back at me, asking me to reconsider for the sake of the family. I felt cornered and kind of pressured, so I just said we'd think about it. The car ride home was awkward. Luke finally spoke up, saying he didn't mind if Emily moved in for a bit, but he agreed it might be uncomfortable. I told him that we're adults now, and we shouldn't feel obligated to say yes just because our dad and Karen want us to. I mean, it's not like they consulted us before offering up our place. Now Karen's been calling and texting me almost every day, asking if we've made a decision. Dad's staying out of it, but I can tell he's hoping we'll say yes. I feel like I'm being cast as the villain for even hesitating. Am I being too harsh? I get that Emily's in a tough spot, but I also think it's unfair to expect us to put our lives on hold for her, especially when we barely have a relationship. Part of me wonders if I'm overreacting, though. Would it really be that bad to let her stay for a few months or am I right to stand my ground? After that awkward conversation, things have only gotten more complicated. My stepmom, Karen, kept pushing for a decision, so I finally sat down with Luke and forced him to be honest with me. He admitted that he was okay with Emily moving in temporarily, but I could see he was saying it more out of obligation than genuine interest. It's not that he's excited about it. He just doesn't want to upset our dad and Karen. Classic Luke move, avoiding confrontation and letting someone else deal with the fallout. Feeling like I had to take the lead, I called Karen back and asked for more details. I wanted to know exactly how long Emily would need to stay, what her financial situation looked like, and whether she was actively searching for a new job. Karen got a bit defensive, saying Emily was doing her best and just needed some space to get back on her feet. When I pressed for a more concrete timeline, like 3 months or 6, Karen snapped, saying, "Are you putting a countdown on helping family now?" That really rubbed me the wrong way. I get that she's worried about her daughter, but throwing guilt trips at me isn't the way to go. I told her that I needed to consider how this would impact our household and our routines, and she shot back. "So you're saying Emily's a burden? Is that what this is about?" The call ended with her saying she's disappointed in me for being so uncooperative. Now I feel like a complete jerk, even though I thought I was being reasonable. The next day, my dad called and tried to play mediator. He said he understood my concerns, but assured me that Emily wouldn't be in our way. According to him, she just needs a change of scenery because she's been feeling isolated and stuck living back home with them. He mentioned that Karen had already promised to cover her part of the rent and any utilities she uses, so it wouldn't cost me or Luke anything financially. I could hear the plea in his voice, like he just wanted to find a way for all of us to get along. He even suggested that maybe having Emily around would help her connect with us more, as if this whole awkward situation could be some kind of bonding experience. I felt guilty, but still unconvinced. I explained that it's not about the money. Having a new roommate, especially family, means adjusting everything, from our schedules to how we use the common spaces. I don't want to be the person who has to tiptoe around in my own place, just because she feels down or awkward. Luke and I are set in our ways, and Emily moving in would disrupt everything. Dad tried to make me see it differently, saying, "It's only temporary, and we're talking about family, Tom. You can't turn your back on her." That's when I started doubting myself. Maybe I was being too harsh. Maybe I wasn't being empathetic enough. I mean, how would I feel if I were in Emily's shoes, lost, struggling, and with nowhere else to go? It made me start to question whether I was being selfish for not wanting to deal with the discomfort of having her around. But then again, I remembered the way Karen practically demanded it, like we owed it to her and Emily. It all came to a head a couple of days later. I came home from work and found Luke sitting in the living room with Emily. She was holding a cup of tea, looking as uncomfortable as I felt seeing her there. Apparently, Karen had asked her to drop by and see the apartment, totally unannounced and without giving me a heads up. We all kind of sat there in this weird silence, and then Emily, almost in a whisper, said, "I didn't know Karen was going to push this so hard. I'm sorry for putting you guys in this position." It was the first time she'd addressed the situation directly, and I could see how embarrassed she was. She even offered to stay out of the common areas as much as possible and promised she'd try to find a job quickly. She seemed genuinely sorry, but it only made me feel more awkward. I didn't know what to say, so I just mumbled something about it being a complicated situation. Luke was no help either. He just kind of looked at me like I was supposed to make everything okay. Eventually, Emily left, saying she'd give us more time to decide. The second she was gone, I turned to Luke and asked why he let her come over without telling me. He shrugged and said he thought it would help to see her in person, make things more real. I lost it a little bit, telling him it wasn't fair to put me on the spot like that. He snapped back, saying I was the one being unfair, that I'd already made up my mind and was shutting down any discussion. We ended up having a huge argument where Luke basically accused me of not caring about family and only thinking about my own comfort. I threw back that he was just going along with whatever Karen and Dad wanted, that he wasn't thinking about what it would actually be like living with Emily day in and day out. Now we're not really speaking. He's been holing up in his room, and I'm starting to feel like the bad guy. I don't want to hurt Emily or cause a rift with our dad and Karen, but I also don't want to make a decision I'll regret. Luke won't even talk about it anymore, saying it's up to me, which somehow makes me feel even worse. So, Reddit, am I being a total jerk for standing my ground? Should I give in and let Emily stay for a few months? Part of me feels like I'm just being stubborn, but the other part can't shake this nagging feeling that letting her move in will create more problems than it solves. After a few days of silent tension between me and Luke, things finally reached a boiling point. Karen sent another text, this time laying on the guilt even thicker. She mentioned how this whole situation is making Emily feel even more unwanted and isolated, and how it's affecting their home environment. She ended it by saying something like, "I didn't realize you felt so disconnected from this family, Tom. If you can't find it in your heart to help your own sister, I guess I really don't know you." That hit me hard. Sure, Emily isn't technically my sister by blood, but we've been family for almost a decade now. I felt torn, questioning my own feelings. Am I just overthinking this? Would it really be that big of a deal to let her stay for a few months? I mean, what's the worst that could happen? That night, I tried to have one last conversation with Luke. He looked exhausted, and I could tell he wasn't in the mood to talk, but I needed to clear the air. I asked him point blank what he really thought. No shrugging it off, no whatever you want, man. Just the truth. He hesitated before finally saying, "I don't mind if she stays for a bit. I feel bad for her, you know. It's not like she's done anything to deserve being stuck at home with Karen breathing down her neck all the time. I get where he's coming from. Emily's always been quieter, more withdrawn, and having Karen's overbearing presence in her life 24/7 is probably suffocating." I told him I understood, but I was worried about how it might change things between us. Luke got defensive, saying I was making it about us versus her, and that I should give Emily a chance. He pointed out that I'd never really made an effort to get to know her, and maybe if I did, I wouldn't be so quick to shut this down. His words stung because there's some truth to them. I've never tried to build a real relationship with Emily. Maybe I'm still holding on to that initial awkwardness from when our families merged, and now I'm using it as an excuse. But even acknowledging that didn't make the thought of her moving in any less uncomfortable. I realized that we weren't getting anywhere, so I told Luke I'd sleep on it one more night and give him a final answer the next day. The next morning, I woke up to a flurry of texts from Karen and my dad. I groaned, expecting more guilt trips or ultimatums. But instead, there was something completely different. Karen wrote that Emily had decided not to wait around for our decision. She packed her things and left home early that morning. No note, no explanation, just gone. Dad said she texted them, both saying she needed some time to figure things out on her own, and that she didn't want to be a burden on anyone. Panic set in. I felt a rush of guilt, fear, and confusion. Where could she have gone? She didn't have a lot of friends, and I knew she didn't have much saved up, considering her part-time jobs hadn't been stable. Karen's messages started to sound more frantic, asking if I'd heard from Emily or if she might have tried reaching out to Luke or me. I ran to Luke's room and woke him up, showing him the texts. He looked as shocked as I felt. I asked if he had any idea where she might have gone, but he shook his head, muttering something about not believing she'd actually leave like this. He pulled out his phone and tried calling her, but it went straight to voicemail. Now the whole thing feels like it spiraled out of control. Karen called me later that afternoon, and for the first time, I heard her voice crack. She sounded so worried, and that strong, pushy tone she always uses was gone. She kept saying she just wanted Emily to be safe, that if I knew anything, I had to tell her. I didn't know what to say. I genuinely had no clue where Emily could have gone. It made me feel awful, like I'd driven her away by not being more welcoming or understanding. The next day, Dad texted that they still hadn't heard from Emily. He's thinking of contacting the police if she doesn't show up soon, and now I'm starting to seriously freak out. What if she's in trouble? What if something happens to her because she thought she couldn't count on any of us? The guilt is eating me alive. I keep replaying the last time I saw her, that awkward tea-drinking session in our living room, and how sad she looked. Was I really being that closed off and cold? Did I make her feel like she had no options? I don't even know what I'd say to her if she called. Part of me wants to beg her to come stay with us now, just so I know she's safe. But I can't help but wonder, would I only be saying that out of guilt? Or because I'm genuinely willing to help? If she shows up now, can we really welcome her into our lives after everything that's been said? I'm stuck in this horrible limbo. Luke's barely talking to me, Karen's a mess, and Dad's desperately trying to hold it all together. I just keep thinking, did I push her to do something drastic by not opening my home to her? And if she comes back, will things ever be normal again? So now I'm reaching out to Reddit. Did I mess this up beyond repair? Should I have just let her move in, even if it felt uncomfortable? And what do I do if she actually reaches out and says she wants to stay with us now? I don't know if I'm looking for advice or just venting, but I feel like I might have lost my chance to make this right. The days have turned into a blur since I last heard from Emily. I've been replaying her message over and over, wondering how I could have missed all the signs that she was struggling so much. Luke hasn't said much since then. I think he's waiting for me to make the next move, but honestly, I don't know what to do. We're stuck in this awkward limbo where we both want to help, but neither of us knows how to reach out without making things worse. I tried calling her again a couple of times, but she didn't pick up. Each time I went to voicemail, my heart sank a little more. It's like she's sending a message that she's not ready to talk, or worse, that she doesn't want to hear from me at all. So I texted her instead. I kept it simple, no pressure, no demands. Just told her that we're here if she needs us, and that I'm sorry for how everything turned out. I don't even know if she read it, but I had to do something to show I care. Dad and Karen are still worried sick, but I think knowing that Emily is at least safe has given them some relief. Dad called me the other day and asked if I thought we could somehow get her to come back home to their place. He said he'd do anything, give her more space, stop pressuring her, whatever it took. It's tough because I don't think it's just about Karen's overbearing nature. Emily needs more than just a physical space. She needs to feel like she belongs somewhere. And I guess that's what makes this whole thing so hard. She doesn't feel like she belongs with any of us. Luke finally opened up a bit last night. We were sitting in the living room, half watching some random show, when he suddenly turned to me and said, "Do you think we should just go find her?" It caught me off guard. Like, physically drive around the city and look for her? I asked. He nodded, saying that it felt wrong just sitting here waiting for her to show up or send another text. He said he'd been thinking about it all day and even drove past a few places she used to go when she needed time alone, a park, a coffee shop she liked, but didn't see her. I understood where he was coming from, but it's not like we know where she's staying. She mentioned being with a friend, but she didn't say who. Driving around aimlessly didn't seem like the best plan. I told Luke that, and he just sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I hate feeling useless," he muttered. "Like, we're just sitting here while she's out there. Who knows where?" I offered a suggestion. Maybe we could write her a letter. I know it sounds old-fashioned, but I figured if she's not responding to calls or texts, maybe she'd read a letter. I could pour out everything I've been feeling, the guilt, the regret, the hope that she'd come back, and she'd have time to process it without the pressure of a real-time conversation. Luke seemed hesitant, but after a bit of back and forth, he agreed. We sat down together, and for the first time in what felt like weeks, we really talked. We talked about our childhood, about how we never really made an effort with Emily when she first came into our lives. Luke admitted he always felt awkward around her because she didn't seem to want to get close to us, and I confessed that I'd never tried hard enough to include her. It was eye-opening to realize how much we both had contributed to this disconnect without even realizing it. Writing the letter was hard. It was like trying to sum up years of miscommunication and misunderstanding in a few pages. I started with an apology, telling her I was sorry for making her feel like she wasn't welcome. I explained why I'd been hesitant about her moving in and admitted that I was scared of losing the comfort and stability I'd finally found with Luke. But I also wrote that I realize now how selfish that was, and that she's more than just an inconvenience or a disruption. She's family, whether I acted like it or not. Luke wrote his own part, too. His words were simpler, more direct. He talked about how he'd never known how to approach her, and how much he regretted not being there for her when she needed someone. He wrote that he wants to change that we both do. He ended his part with something that really got to me. You're not a burden, Am. You're not someone we have to deal with. We want you here. We should have told you that from the start, but we're telling you now. We sent the letter to the address she used to live at, hoping her friend might pass it along. Then came the waiting, more days of silence, of feeling like maybe we'd done too little, too late. Luke stopped by Dad's house a couple of times to check in. Karen didn't say much to him, but Dad mentioned she's been crying herself to sleep most nights. She blames herself for pushing Emily to reach out to us in the first place, convinced that if she'd just kept quiet, Emily would still be at home, even if she wasn't happy. 2 nights ago, I got another text from Emily. It was late, almost midnight, and I was getting ready for bed when my phone buzzed. I got your letter. Thank you. I just need some more time. I'm not ready to come back yet, but I'll let you know when I am. Please don't worry. It's not your fault. I'm figuring things out. I showed the message to Luke, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. He smiled just a little, but it was there. We texted her back, saying we understand and that we'll wait as long as she needs, that she can reach out whenever she's ready. I'm not sure what's going to happen next. I don't know if she'll move in with us eventually, or if she'll find another place to stay. But I do know one thing. I've learned a hard lesson about what it means to really be there for family. It's not just about providing a place to stay or giving money. It's about creating a space where people feel safe, wanted, and included. And I failed at that, at least at first. But I'm trying to do better now. So I guess that's where I'll leave things for now. It's not a neat, tidy ending, but life's rarely like that. If Emily decides she wants to move in with us, I'm ready to welcome her with open arms, no questions asked. And if she doesn't, that's okay too. As long as she knows that we're here for her, that she's wanted, that's enough for me. Thanks, Reddit, for listening. I think I just needed to get all of this off my chest.